How did you get to New York City?
New York City felt like a very natural extension of my life and community. I grew up in upstate New York in Ithaca. And I think it was pretty common for people who graduated from the college that I went to come down into New York. And then I was always very captivated by the arts. And so it just naturally made sense as a next step. I don't think I interrogated it that much. I think now, 15 years on, I'm for the first time thinking, why did I move here? And do I want to live somewhere else? But it wasn't a decision I put a lot of thought into. And I'm really glad that I ended up here.
Were you always artistically oriented? Was that a part of your childhood, your youth?
It's a really good question. I loved the definition that you were sharing about art earlier. And I think my own definition of art is just how to have a very particularized and rapturous relationship with existence, to kind of take an oath of fealty to life itself. And for me, what does it mean to be a prism for life? And the prism of my own perception is how do I kind of regurgitate and compost existence back to itself? And so to me, being an artist or being artistically inclined is not being wedded to any particular discipline, but really just it's a state of being or a way of relating to the skin of life in a way that I think is really generative. So I wouldn't say that I had a particular practice from a young age. I danced. I did a lot of serious ballet from a young age. I read constantly. I was a very nerdy, very voracious reader. But I would say the foundation that I was swimming in was one in which imagination was very much encouraged and advanced by my parents. That before I did what I now do, which is creative direct and design experiences, my parents would create these really fantastical birthday parties for me.
Wow.
And they weren't opulent or like excessive in any way, but they were deeply imaginative. When I was 5, my mom knew that I was obsessed with Peter Pan. And so one day came to me with a translucent cutout piece of material and said, Ilana, I think Peter Pan left his shadow here and he's going to come back for it at some point. And lo and behold, when my birthday party came, my mom's holding up the shadow to this gaggle of young kindergartners. And there's a knock at the window behind her. And there is Peter Pan, AKA my dad's graduate student, dressed up in an outfit that my mom had sewed for him. And suddenly we're in this immersive treasure hunt with this Peter Pan figure. And that sort of set the tone. I think that sort of exemplifies what a lot of my life was like around whimsy and wonder being very much encouraged.
You were a reader. Were you also a writer?
Yes. I have some very silly pieces that young Ilana wrote that were always like very earnest and ardent and very passionate. But I loved writing. Yeah.
When you were in school, you went to Cornell, I assume? Okay. Yeah. Did you at that point think you had enough clarity to believe your life is heading towards New York and you're going to be involved in the arts in some capacity? Where were you? What were you studying at that point?
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of chutzpah to decide I'm going to make it the big city. These are really helpful questions because I don't think I'd given it much thought at all. But I was always interested in language and expression. And from elementary school to high school, that involved dance, that involved writing, that involved reading, and that involved theater. And so as an undergrad, I was an English major and then did a minor in dance and theater. And then did my master's in English literature and a PhD in English literature. So I just kind of kept following that path. But I didn't really have much of a plan. I think as many young people do, I came to New York and was expecting I need to be involved in things that really delight me and stimulate me, but I wasn't so much clear on what a path is. I know we were talking earlier about these people who pick up a trombone and they know that's their calling, their dharma, their destiny. That was not the case for me. Yeah.
What was your impression of the city itself before? I don't know how often you came here when you were young, but did you have a concept of what living in New York, being in New York would be like?
I did not. I did not. It's something that I'm very much in the ripe processing of now, because I grew up in this really crunchy, verdant, Ithaca is gorgeous is the catchphrase. Yes. So I was used to the propinquity in nature was such a big deal to me. And I'm now starting to feel the heartache of trying to grapple with that in this concrete jungle and figure out how can I preserve the delight and excitement that I feel around being around the arts while also accessing these deeper bass notes that are really homesick for green and silence and tranquility. But I think I had initially envisioned New York being the old Broadway, like this idea of just you could be out, it'd be thrilling. It's the champagne bubble energy of getting to be around all these lively, bustling, raucous artists. And that feels like it's been the case, as we were talking about. You can meet all these odd, eccentric, whimsical characters. And I've felt really, really lucky to brush up against as many of them as I possibly can.
So you came here right after college?
Yes.
Did you try immediately? I know you were getting a degree in literature, it sounds like. But did you try to get actively, intentionally involved in the art world when you got to New York? Or was that just sort of there by default because of where you were?
So this, like all, I think, great stories, is a love story, which is I was in between my junior and senior year of college, and I came down to New York for an internship over the summer. And I saw the production Sleep No More, which is sort of hailed as the grandfather of immersive theater, or they call it site-specific or site-sympathetic work. But it's where instead of sitting down and sort of passively watching a show as you would in a traditional proscenium production, you are actually empowered to wander through a space. Sleep No More had 100 rooms, 100,000 square feet, and you choose to follow the performers wherever you wish, and you sort of piece together these disparate pieces of the experience. And I, as someone that was like a Disney fanatic when I was growing up, someone who nerdily loved Harry Potter when I was growing up, I loved the idea of these like rich, thick, densely layered worlds. And so to be able to inhabit a world like that in a theatrical production, it was a tale of Shakespeare's Macbeth as told through a Hitchcockian film noir lens. So it hit on all my favorite literary roots too. I instantly fell in love. I was like, I need to see this piece so many more times. I wish I could work on it. So I was actually intending to work at a casting agency. I was all ready to go with my after college job. And a few weeks before graduation, saw a posting for an unpaid internship at Sleep No More. And I was like, oh no, I think I have to do this. So I applied and got it. And I think I graduated it was a matter of days after I graduated that I moved down here. And on that Monday, started my internship at Sleep No More. And so I sort of fell into the moment that I started living in New York. I was starting to work at this theater company it had been around for a little over a year. And it ended up running for almost 14 years, and I was with it until the end. So I sort of fell in very fortunately to this artistic theatrical world that is this strange bricolage of like contemporary dance, site-specific theater. A lot of jazz musicians work there, the artisans who work on the set, the craftspeople, the costume designers. So it was this beautiful assemblage of dreamers and makers that I was just ensconced in that world as a 21-year-old until this past year.
I'd love to hear more about that. Was this an N of one? Was there anything else like it in New York? Has there been?
It's such a good question. I think this form has been around in less mainstream commercial ways for a number of years. And, but I think Punch Drunk really did bring it into the public imaginary, bring it into the public consciousness, particularly with this production. They had done previous iterations of Sleep No More, in London at a schoolhouse, and then with the ART in Boston. And then an American production company called Immersive brought it to New York, where it was then popularized as this sort of fusion of nightlife, New York nightlife culture, and the theatrical off-Broadway scene. And Felix Barrett, who is the artistic director of Punch Drunk, it's a UK company, the genesis of creating this was that he wanted audiences to say, not this is what I did last night, but listen to what happened to me last night. And so the bounds of the artistic experience would actually spill over into this postmortem. You and I are such fans of conversation as an art form that actually the dialogue, because everyone's going their separate ways and having their individual experiences, it would create this liminal, uncanny space between what is fiction and what is reality that you would want to unpack and analyze and deconstruct.
Did most people who, I know nothing about this world, did most people who went there, they had that experience where it was really a conversation starter, less of a passive experience than something that you're actively involved in? For somebody who had never gone to it before, talk to me about what it would be like to walk in those doors and have an evening there.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so. I think a testament to the kind of like strange, provocative nature of this work is just how many articles are written about it online. Yeah. These fervent, rabid, if you look on Discord, Reddit, even major publications, they talk about things like, this is what happened to me. This character pulled me in. But it would be that you'd walk into this place. There was a fictional construct called the McKittrick Hotel, which is where all of this show took place. And you would walk in and you'd be given an anonymizing mask. So instead of the delineation in a typical production is you're on stage and you're a performer, or you're in the seats and you're an audience member, the mask functions as a seat. So if you're an audience member, you don this sort of anonymizing mask. And I think the theory behind that is that you aren't as self-conscious and that you're encouraged to sort of abandon your instincts and roam and be bold. And so you then would walk through this space that is deeply, every room is scented differently, is at a different temperature, is filled with this meticulous detail and these props. Like if you imagine the attention to detail on a Disney ride, that's like a level 1 to this 50 that, you know, you can rifle through drawers, read these letters that people have spent hours writing. There's just such a layer of detail that you can continue penetrating this world. Or you can go watch these incredibly talented contemporary dancers who are doing a largely wordless version of Shakespeare's Macbeth across all these rooms. So you might follow Macbeth down these various corridors, see him enact all of these major scenes, but in a very kind of expressionist, abstract way. Again, set to this kind of Hitchcockian, bombastic score. And so people really lost themselves in it. And I think the moment that really impacted people was this Pokemon Go kind of gotta catch 'em all thing, where there were these encounters called one-to-one or one-on-one experiences, where a performer might suddenly turn to you and offer their hand, draw you into a room, take off your mask, and have a deeply intimate personal scene in which they tell you a story through a monologue or exchange some kind of ritual with you, all very specific to their character. But it's a little bit like a micro version of Marina Abramovich's work, The Artist is Present, where it's somebody just looking deep in your eyes, seeing your humanness, and having this fleeting moment of intimacy with a stranger. And people, I think, found that utterly addicting and bewitching. And so there was a lot of post-mortem conversation after of like, one of the witches in Macbeth took me into this little room and told me a story, and it was so thrilling and exciting, and I didn't know how to think about it. And so
wow.
Yeah, it was really
you
fun.
started as an unpaid intern.
Yeah.
Tell me about your trajectory there. What did you do there?
I was just so excited to be in a cog in this sort of complex Swiss clock, because like any art form, it takes this myriad of different departments and great thinkers. And so I was just so eager to learn. I think that's a hallmark of anyone with a kind of artistic sensibility. It's just like, I'm so hungry for knowledge as a prism for seeing the world. And I knew that each vantage point that I gained into the production would enhance my appreciation for it. And that absolutely was true. So I worked in front of house, coat check-in. I worked in the bar. I worked helping the artistic team, doing all the dramaturgical research for events that they threw. They opened these private venues, a rooftop, and then I worked in the private events team, producing events like fashion shows and concerts and corporate events, weddings. And then I was also in the cast. So I was in the cast from 2012 until the end. And that was also a beautiful experience to be part of that, really getting to have these incredible interactions with your fellow performers, but also strangers, hundreds of people every night that you would get to see in this dark, shadowy, strange dreamscape. So it was deeply special to me.
Was it enduringly invigorating? It was this wellspring of consistent interest and energy for you. How do you remember those years? A friend of mine who got his PhD in astrophysics, bless, a brilliant mind. When I was getting my PhD, he said to me, savor this because it is very rare that you will get to spend this much time on one idea, sort of unpacking or percolating, simmering in this one space. In the whatever professional realm you go into, there's a slightly more frenetic pace. You're not getting to steep yourself in a work the way that academia lets you. And I actually felt the same way about Sleep No More. It is so rare in the performing arts world, unless you're touring with The Lion King or some really enduring production, to get to revisit a piece of art again and again and watch yourself change. I played some of these roles for over a decade. And so to get to not be too precious about the material and to allow yourself to mess up or not get it right or have bad nights and know there was a chance to return back and to continue learning and to be perpetually growing in these roles, that was one thing. But also the socio-political landscape changed so much. Like there was a pause where it was closed for about 1.5 years during the pandemic. But I played those roles, and a lot of, Macbeth is about tyranny and dictatorship and political unrest and suspicion and paranoia. And many administrations passed as I did that, told that same story. And different social upheaval movements have happened since then. And so to sort of mark the passage of time as, wow, I'm delivering this same monologue or I'm executing these same sequence of moves, but I am perpetually moving forward with a shifting context through which to understand it, was such a gift. And I think it's unlikely that I'll ever get that gift again. You mentioned this already, but you were getting a PhD at the same time.
Yes.
Were you surprised that I don't know if this was a full-time position. It sounds like it probably was, or something close to it.
Yeah.
That you're in academia hardcore, and then you also have this world that you've majorly committed yourself to. Were you surprised that this was where your professional career seemed to be taking you?
I feel like you're giving me so much credit for conscious thought that I definitely did not have. I just sort of surfed the waves and found myself in it, and delighted to find myself in it. But I had always imagined myself becoming a professor. That's what my dad is, a professor. And I was so inspired not only by how much he genuinely enjoys his work, but what an incredible dad he was. He was so present and so involved in our lives. And so it seemed like such a rich quality of inner life and interpersonal life. But I didn't want to go into that right after college. So Sleep No More happened. I was, part of this exciting cast. I was working in all these different departments. And then at some point I really realized, like, oh, this is what I wanted. I will be so sad if I don't end up pursuing this rich intellectual life that I've dreamed of. But because a PhD is such a big commitment, I first did a master's degree abroad in Belfast in Northern Ireland. And I did that for a year, took a break from Sleep No More. And when I returned just to the performance part. I said, I'm going to spend my days applying to the PhD program and going to the PhD. And then I'll perform like 3 nights a week. And it actually was a really mutually nourishing cross-pollination because my performance work fed my academic work and vice versa. And then by the time I graduated in my PhD, I'd spent such a long time with this company and felt like I'd continued to grow and learn. And so they actually created a role for me as when I graduated, that I became the chief storyteller of the company. So I did a lot of writing, marketing, dramaturgical work, hosting, moderating, again, creative direction and experience design. So it was really beautiful to have this iterative process with the company and with school.
How did you think about utilizing, and I'm sure there's some crossover, but the skills and the knowledge you gained in your PhD program with this blossoming career with Sleep No More? At any point, did you consider going back down the academic route, or had you gotten the bug so deeply in the artistic world that you knew something had changed in you?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I became disenchanted with academia maybe a year and a half in to a 6-year PhD program, which was quite a quandary. I think one of the reasons that my dad is so happy in his career, and it's such a beautiful thing to watch him now towards the end of his career, he's contemplating retirement, and to see that he's just getting so much out of it, is it's deeply applicable to the present moment. He studies cognitive bias and judgment and decision-making, social psychology and behavioral economics. And I think for me, I envisioned a degree in literary studies as sort of doing what he and my mom, who's also a psychologist, do with people, but with art. I want to get so close to the art and analyze it and be deeply enraptured by it and fixated on all these little clues. And unfortunately, in, I think, academia, I felt myself, I don't want to generalize, but personally, I found myself getting, by degrees, more and more removed from the actual art, because people would say, well, you need to talk about like what Kant would think of this play or what Foucault would think of this book. And I was like, I don't care what they thought of this. Like, I just want to talk about the art. And I can appreciate, like, I think a lot of the humanities is now having a deeply political intervention, which is so necessary and so important. But for me, the deep soul connection was being able to, what they call close reading, to genuinely be so close to the piece of art that you were able to unpack it and nourish it and explore it. And I felt like if I had to take a really theoretical approach that just got laden with all kinds of jargon, it felt insular, and I was sort of like, who are we talking to exactly except each other? So about halfway through the program, I was like, this isn't for me. I do want to finish, but I want to finish for its own sake and not as a career trajectory.
Given that Sleep No More is now closed, right? A year or two ago?
It'll be a year in January. Yeah.
How are you thinking about, given that transition, which I'm sure must have been pretty massive in your own life?
Yeah. And
given the interest that you've said you have as it relates to art, what are you thinking about might be the jobs, the callings, the kind of opportunities that might be there for you to take what you've learned, take your interests, and stay involved? What's resonating at this point?
Yeah, I think I never went into it thinking about job security. So after Sleep No More closed, I was working actually on another production for Immersive called Life and Trust that was a similarly immersive format, similar size and scope, giant production in the financial district. And it closed really abruptly in April of this year. So hundreds of us found ourselves suddenly being like, oh, we've got to pivot to a new career. I did not think how secure this kind of job would be, but now I'm working as a freelance creative director and experience designer. And I find that as we get, as a species and as a culture, more anesthetized, more removed, more technologically mediated, because I think people are so homesick for ritual, catharsis, connection, wonder, awe, deep presence. Everyone and their mother wants experience design. They want some kind of live, deeply personal, connected, on your feet, embodied experience. And so I've actually found a lot of deep artistic fulfillment and intellectual stimulation in starting to do this for individuals, brands, companies, and being able to design these moments that feel really fulfilling. So for example, I had a wonderful couple who were getting married in Sicily this past summer. And instead of a traditional wedding, they had seen Sleep No More and they wanted something akin to that. And so I designed an experience for them that was about creating all these strange, whimsical Easter eggs for their guests. I hired some of my fantastic coworkers from Sleep No More, and we conducted this sort of wacky experience that these guests could undergo. And I really do feel so optimistic about the future of these deeply personal experiences that are designed to provoke reflection, contemplation, and deep aliveness.
I would love you. I think you're probably very well positioned to speak on this. As you alluded to, that there's almost like an analog desire, a desire to go back to a different time for most people. That how can you tell that there is such an appetite, such a hunger for so many people that it sounds like even just this year you've probably worked with. These are in-person experiences, I would imagine. What is giving you the indication that there's an unmet need here and an opportunity?
I think that the philosophy undergirding this podcast is so inspiring to me.
Thank you.
That you are curious about the genesis of art and how it unfolds and unfurls in different individuals. And similarly, I am so curious about where art lives in the mosaic of each human being. And it does live in the mosaic of each human being, whether or not you're consciously practicing it. And so I think we all have an artistic gland. Maybe it's laying dormant. Maybe we've been conditioned by our families of origin or by our culture not to like cultivate and nourish it. But we are creators. We are deeply creative, curious, introspective, intrepid, imaginative people. And so I do think, whether we know it consciously or not, storytelling is the oldest human technology we have, and it is deeply human. I don't think it's exclusive to humans. And this is my new soapbox, as I'm obsessed with making art with plants. But I do think that having a sort of cold, technologically mediated brand, let's say, launch that feels like it's being done not for its own sake, but for an ends, we pick up on that. And if we are having an experience where the brand is an afterthought, but gets deeply embedded with and linked to this visceral feeling of aliveness and presence, you're going to remember that brand forever because you had this transcendent experience. Whereas if it's only about telling the story of this brand for its own sake and you feel that closed circuit, it's not going to be captivating to us.
I would think a lot of people that you work with are a bit rusty in showcasing their artistic bent. And I'm curious how you incentivize or encourage or make it easier for people. And I don't, the devil's in the details with this, but how do you help people in some of these experiences tap back into something that's innate in all children? How do you do that? What have you found really works outside of great design? I would imagine there's a lot more that goes into helping cultivate that kind of an experience for people.
Yeah. It's such a good question. And I think you do it so well here. You're obviously an innately curious person. I think so much leads back to curiosity. So I'll kind of ramble for a little bit in two separate directions, but I promise it's going to unify. So I have a series called PMS, Philosophical Musing Sessions, and it's a live talk show that's in Williamsburg. And it's co-hosted by plants. So I have a plant that I introduce as my co-host every month. And the reason it's called Philosophical Musing Sessions, or PMS, is that I schedule it the week right before my period, when I'm at my my most unhinged, my most feral. And the idea is that it's this conversation fueled by big feelings and big questions. And so I want to put myself out there at my perceived ugliest, worst, messiest, and to see what generates from there. And the two questions that I ask guests sort of relate to this question. One is, where do you find beauty and meaning? And the one I ask at the close of the conversation is, what is one piece of art that has sort of planted an indelible kiss on your life? What is one piece of art that has just like lingered with you, really lingered in your marrow? And the reason I ask both of those things, it's really hard initially. It's quite vulnerable to say where you find beauty and meaning, but that's the whole game. That's it. That's what we're here to do, to learn and to love and to be present for this glorious gift of existence. And I think so many of our systems and civilizations are not designed around this question. And when you actually get people to think about what's meaningful to them, I have been so stirred by these deeply personal stories. The most recent guest I had said, I've actually realized that I love going home to Utah and seeing my closest childhood friends. And we took detours and we spent time away from each other, but coming back, I feel seen and known and I feel witnessed. And then I get excited because I'm like, what can we design around that? What has happened to you? How do you feel sparked? What is the kindling there that then we can start to design consciously for more of that experience? And similarly, the reason that I ask people about what is one incredible piece of art that you've experienced, it's endless. It is like a boundless banquet that we can feast on of art that exists in the world, the art that is just parading by us every day. And it lives in different people differently. There's no more intimate, better way to know someone than through their art or through their metabolizing of art, to understand how it lives in them. Because even if they don't think of themselves as a practitioner or a maker, they have ingested it in a way that is deeply particularized and personal to them. And so just priming people with the idea of art is really important. And then, because you're asking a really good practical question that I'm capering away from, I'll try to answer it more concretely. When you think of these magical stories, whether it's like Narnia, Harry Potter, trying to think what else, but any of these sort of mythic tales, often there is a portal or a threshold or a liminal space that takes us out of our present day pedestrian experience and launches us into that stratospheric realm. And so how do you create, either physically or ritualistically, a space where somebody can cast off all the baggage that they've been carrying from the everyday world and open up to a space of wonder and presence? And so Sleep No More is actually a great example of this. As you walk off the street and you come into this kind of decompression chamber, which is a maze where there's this loud music playing. It's almost pitch dark. In some ways, people start getting quite terrified and they have to almost feel their way through this dark maze. And then you come out and you are in this jazz bar where the lighting is low and moody. It feels like you've stepped into 1930s. And suddenly you're like, oh, absolutely anything could be the end of this mythopoetic dark abyss. And what could be on the other side? But it's something that takes you usually out of your head into your body and geared towards the present tense experience. And so I would say to anybody who wants to do this on a small budget, low scale in their room, like, create a ritual for yourself in which you physically and thematically step into a new register, step into a new atmosphere. Whether it's like, I'm consciously going to put on a different outfit right now. I'm going to set the mood with music or lighting or candles. I'm going to, natural elements are great. Light a fire, be in a bath, touch the earth, do something that resets you and primes you to be looking around and seeing what's there.
I'd love to get any more thoughts you may have on what you are learning or themes that are coming out from people about, I think you mentioned the words meaning and purpose, that this is kind of what it's all about. I think I'm fascinated by people who are, who speak on their deathbed, like people who are reflecting on their life in their closing months and what they say matters. How, in many ways you're a designer, and I love the concept of being intentional about designing your days, your life, to have the life you want and be aware of that. What are the components or the themes, I guess, that have come up consistently that would be worth sharing about when people do open up and they're a little bit more vulnerable about their life, the sources of meaning and purpose? I'm also fascinated today by how much of everyone's lives are being lived in this digital hallucination. And what you're seemingly cultivating, and I seem to be drawn to this increasingly as I get older, are these analog in-person rooms that could have existed 100 years ago or even 1,000 years ago. it's a rambling way for me to basically ask, what are the themes you're noticing or the insights people are having that seem to be generating the kind of meaning and purpose that everybody is at the end of the day, at the end of their life, really trying to obtain? I don't know if anything has come out yet.
Yeah.
But I'd be curious to get your thoughts on that and the subject.
It's so funny you articulated it right at the top about talking about our mortality. I think death is the big one, right? The big taboo, the big unknown, the big fear. And it is such a deep ally that we don't wield or harness enough. And it's funny how much it tinges our lives with urgency, like a really useful generative urgency. And so I don't think we think about it. It's sort of lurking in the shadows. But when we consciously have to start talking about meaning, it does not take long until we're suddenly talking about death, which I think is beautiful and profound. And I'm often thinking about death as a sort of co-conspirator in art. That death is right over my shoulder saying like, come on, show me what you've got. Life is short. Life is so fleeting and precious. And so art to me is life with death on its heels. Art is life with a sort of urgency of our mortality in it. And I am fond of sort of thinking of life as a draft, because whether or not you believe that it gets finished by someone else or it just gets set aside, no matter what you think happens after life, this is the only one. This is, in my opinion, the one draft we are making in this present moment. And not only is that really beautiful as a process, but it also is like a gorgeous lesson in just like perpetually returning and perpetual possibility. You can like write your own salvation with every single sentence. You can choose to write the most intoxicating love story between you and existence in every single moment. You have the capacity to continue to wed yourself to the world extravagantly if you choose. So a lot of, I think, what people are excited about talking about meaning, it usually they're talking about death. But I would say relationships, deep connection, the more than human world. And I have heard people talk about a balance of ingestion and expression. So a lot of times it's what are the pieces of art or stimulation or relationships that they absorbed and took in and received, and how was that balanced with how much they were putting out or expressing. And I think some of us fall, oh my gosh, I've been consuming too much TV lately without expressing myself in a certain way. Some are the opposite. Oh, I feel like I'm just putting a lot out there, but it's feeling hollow because I'm not on a rich diet of art right now. And so it is interesting to follow those traces of you are this constellation of everyone you meet and everything you encounter. And so anything that you happen to see in this life or meet in this life can be composted for your own expression.
You've mentioned plants a couple times, and
love plants.
I would love to. I'm always fascinated by people too who have done. You were mentioning offline that you've done ayahuasca, many times, and that is talk about a liminal space or a sacred space. It's not one I'm familiar with, but I know people who have ventured down there. I'd love to ask you what mostly you have gotten out of those experiences. Maybe to start with, what was calling you initially to explore one of the most profound and powerful psychedelics on earth.
Yeah.
What's that story?
Oh, well, I think I was in an experience of dealing with some deep pain and trauma. And I was sort of using a bunch of different modalities to grapple with that. Traditional therapy being one of them, hypnotherapy being another, and plant medicine being another. Yeah. And I don't think you can, it's nice to have a charcuterie board of different offerings. Sure. I wouldn't say that you should do plant medicine without doing traditional therapy, but I would certainly say it gave me an aerial perspective and much needed bird's eye view to help address some of the trauma that I had experienced and the pain that I was in. And very quickly, it sort of transmuted from that state of pain to a state of deep gratitude. And the reason that I kept returning to these experiences was really, how do I give back? How do I continue to sort of drink at this well of love, gratitude, insight, and creative sparring partnership? And I think I would say the most incredible parts of any plant medicine experience, it is designed, first of all, if you're doing it in a setting where it's led by indigenous tribal leaders, it's an experience of being in a culture that is so different from your own. A culture that reveres elders, a culture that reveres deep listening and sort of subordinating the human consciousness or the human ego to a non-human consciousness, whether or not you think it's something outside of yourself or something that your brain chemistry is producing, it is in some way you interfacing with a plant. And I say that these medicines will make artists and poets and dreamers of us all. Again, I think it just brings that deep well of feeling and expression straight to the surface. And I think we are longing for these community experiences of being witnessed. I have sat, usually a ceremony is a collective experience as opposed to an individual one, and to watch people grapple with their own wounds and face their demons in this deep, introspective way is endlessly inspiring to me. I always say that Pixar and plant medicine are my big reasons to hope right now. I think the next generation of kids are getting way better messages from Disney than we did. And I think that this generation has a number of therapeutic modalities at their disposal, including plant medicine, that our parents didn't. And I think that's a really wonderful reason, especially in this bleak bucking bronco of an era, to feel like there is a reason to hope. And that's that we are getting an intimate relationship with the more than human world, often by literally ingesting these psychedelic plants that are able to teach us to get out of our own way and love.
That was what I was going to ask you now. How have these experiences changed you or influenced you? Do you regard them as some of the most important experiences of your life? That's probably a rhetorical question, but how have they changed you? How are you different now?
Ironically, in relationship to this podcast, I think that those experiences allowed me to claim an identity as an artist. I was quite skittish about embracing that because I felt like, well, I'm not talented enough. I don't have a craft that is solid enough to be able to embrace it. But to experience the deep artistry of these moments of just seeing the world through an endlessly abundant and curious perspective is the most beautiful artistic melody that anyone could ever play or be played by. And so particularly after two, so I read a Substack called A Being Place that came very directly out of a plant dieta that I did, which is 2 weeks. It doesn't have to include ayahuasca. For many, it doesn't, but it's about reducing most stimuli. So you eat very simple food. You don't take in media. You don't have technology. It's almost like a meditation retreat. And instead, your main stimulus is this plant. So it's they're called ally plants in some indigenous traditions. Like Shipibo is the tribe that I've sat with the most. But you are experiencing this sort of, the idea is plant consciousness. And after I did that first dieta, I made this Substack. And then after I did this second dieta, I made this PMS series, which is about plants. So it usually feels like quite literally an artistic project will be born out of these experiences. But I think more importantly, I wish there was better language that I could use to describe the nobility of the human condition, the nobility of the process, the gift that it is to even get to experience the pain of life, to be here, to be present. I just access a different altitude that allows me to not be mired in my lived experience, but to sort of transcend it and to look around and say, okay, I want to dance with this. I choose this over and over again. And I think for anybody that worships at the cult of the imagination or the cult of creativity, it really all comes down to how nimble can you be at holding a multiplicity of perspectives at the same time. And so for plant medicine, there's a lot of scientific research on this. If you've ever read How to Change Your Mind, Michael Pollan, when they talk about a child's consciousness and someone on psychedelics, it's the lantern consciousness that allows you to see seemingly disparate things as united. They talk about this as synesthesia, but also what would allow me to pick up this plastic cup and say, oh, this is a horse, like a kid would say. I want to play pretend with this pony. That's also what we're able to do on psychedelics. Whereas typically as adults, we have a spotlight consciousness. We've learned to tune out this external stimuli because it is a biological imperative to be able to survive and focus only on what is important. And so to take the time and the space to allow our neural pathways to unite again, to befriend one another, to become companions so that we can literally see more, hear more, experience more, feel more than we do in our typical lives is a ridiculous gift and comes with medical risks and legal risks. So I would say that anybody don't wander into this lightly. I think the way that many indigenous cultures, again, like the Shipibo or the Yawanawa do it, it's like you need to treat this as sacred. It is not a drug. It is not a party. It is a medicine that needs to be taken very, very seriously.
You started the conversation by talking about how much imagination was such a big part of your childhood and how much you seemingly loved that part of life and yourself.
Yeah.
And I would imagine these experiences that you've had on ayahuasca maybe have been almost like a return to that state in some ways. How have you been able to maintain what seems like a fairly active imagination into adulthood, given the spotlight incentives of paying the bills and dealing with life and staying in shape and doing adult things?
Our adulting, our never ending.
Yeah, for sure.
I think, again, with the Sleep No More experience, I was gifted a very whimsical job where I basically got to play pretend for a living for a long time.
With people who were doing the same thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that allowed me to stay really close to this imaginative property. But I would also just say the love of art will keep you close to that forever. So even when I am just consuming other people's work, I think it is like stretching your imagination, is keeping you more elastic, more open, just by delving into all these fictional worlds. You read a novel, you read a poem, you walk into an art gallery, you go to a concert, and there's this feeling of like, we are so adept at telling stories. And I will continue to just want to see the world through as many artistic prisms as possible, not even just mine, but the ones that other people hand to me on these silver platters. So I think if you are somebody that feels like you've maybe strayed a little bit from your artistic yearnings or loves, and it feels like too much pressure to begin creating on your own and be proactive about that, then just be proactive about like dieting as much as art as you possibly can. Going to see, read, smell, taste, go to a gorgeous meal, go look in a store where they are like devoted. Yes, a store, like you think of it as capitalism, but if you find an artist who makes beautiful clothes, to see anyone in devotion to their craft will enrich your own sensibility, I think.
What is the role that this city has played for you in being able to satiate that? I mean, you're in the art capital, arguably, of the world and have been for a long time.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear about how New York has helped you with that, if it has, to maintain that appetite, to keep the imagination alive, and what great art is happening here that you love and would recommend to people who might come across this.
I'm totally going to steal this answer from you earlier that we were talking about the idea that it's so hard to live here.
Yeah.
And that you have to respect people that do it because they are doing it against all odds. And so I would say that is one of the things that is most difficult about New York and most galvanizing to me about New York, because everyone is here because they want to be at the top of their game, whether it's in finance, food, fashion, art, music, you will find it here. And I think that creates a lot of bitterness. So you might meet somebody who's like really holding on to, oh, I wanted to be an actor and I had a failed acting career. But it also creates these like deeply passionate people that you could walk into a bar and meet someone who is so passionate about mixology because this would be the place to go.
Yeah.
Or you go to a bar and your bartender is a concert pianist on the side. And so no matter where you are, you can meet someone who is so connected to this world of wanting to hustle in order to be close to this pulsating, fantastic, complicated thing that we call art. And for me, I am really excited by what's happening in theater right now. So one of the things that I studied as a undergrad, master's, and PhD was Shakespeare, and particularly contemporary adaptations of Shakespeare. So I'm not a historian. I didn't dive so much into early modern England. But one of the things that I do know is that Shakespeare was living in such a fertile, creative renaissance, literally, that he was part of a network of playwrights and artists and thinkers who were all trading. A scholar called William West calls these intertheatrical memes, which is like they were all sort of in conversation with one another's plays as these playing companies were going. So it was like, you're putting a ghost in your play? Great, I'll put a ghost in my play. You're going to have a bloody letter. Let's do. So it was a conversation that was taking place in the public sphere. And right before the pandemic started, I think we started to see that from a number of exceptional playwrights that are playing with form and craft in order to interrogate their own medium in a way that I think is really rare. So we are living literally in New York now in a pocket of some of the best playwriting we've seen for a long time. So I would say if you haven't seen a play by Brandon Jacob Jenkins, you need to research this man. I think he is the best living playwright ever. Jackie Sybil's Jewelry, Jeremy O'Harris, like really incredible playwrights who are doing this meta theatrical interrogation of their medium. Martin McDonough is another one that I really love. Jez Butterworth, just great playwrights that I think are worth investigating.
What are some of their plays that you've seen that you love, if any come to mind?
I mean,
and we can look this up after if nothing comes to mind, because I have a hard time remembering these as well.
Brandon Jacob Jenkins, my favorite work that he did, it was called An Octoroon, and he also did a play called The Comeuppance. But his most recent work that people might be familiar with was Appropriate, which won some Tony Awards, and then Purpose, that was here this summer, that also won some Tony Awards. Another really great show is called John Proctor is the Villain, that was here this summer by a playwright named Kimberly Bellflower. Just feral and transcendent and liberating and really, really special. So I would say those are good ones to check out. Jez Butterworth wrote a play called Jerusalem, which is the most exquisite performance in a play I've ever seen. Mark Rylance, who is, I think, the greatest living actor, played a character named Johnny Rooster Byron, which is like a basically play version of Robert Bly's Iron John, if anyone's familiar with that book. It's so much about coming of age and rites of passage and land and being connected to the earth and flouting societal conventions. And it's, oh God, I was harpooned by that show. My life will never be the same from seeing him. Ethan Hawke said that seeing Mark Rylance in that role was like what it must have been like to see Jimi Hendrix play guitar live. Like the air changes. So
incredible.
If you ever get a chance to see him do anything, but particularly that play, run, don't walk.
I like to close these conversations by having a final commentary on the word success. We were talking, I think, before we were recording about the concept of having enough. And I would love to put this to you about how you think about enough, how you think about success for yourself personally. You know, if we were to talk in a year or two and you think about your future, how do you think about, if you do at all, the word success and how it applies to your life, to yourself? You're charting off seemingly on a new trajectory at this point, which I'm sure is exciting and a little scary. But how do you think about success as it applies to your life and your work coming up here?
Yeah. I want to be caught up in the beautiful waves of existence as much as, like, I want to surf as many of them as possible. And so what comes to mind, we were just chatting about the new Knives Out movie.
Yeah.
I saw it on Sunday, was so obsessed that I went back to see it on the next day.
Really?
And because I knew I wanted to write about it. And I wrote a Substack piece about it. I think like 2 people read it. I was so giddily happy writing an essay about this thing, knowing that very few people would read it. I was as perfectly present as I could ever. I think I was at my computer for like 3 hours without interruption, without batting an eye, just being there in the live active process of like doing cartwheels in my own brain and then trying to like throw my arms around this piece of art from as many angles as possible. And to me, that is just like, there's no external metric that could be gratified. Like whether or not people, I hope people like it, I hope people read it, but in and of itself, I want as many of those moments as of pure, unadulterated rapture being inflected, having my heart like lanced by art. My God, I want as many of those as possible. And I think especially as someone who loves language, language is a failed medium. Language can never penetrate the wordlessness at the center of existence. And so for me, it's always beauty is laying down her gauntlet and being like, can you try? Can you absolutely try to like emboss or anoint this experience with your language, knowing that you will never succeed? And to me, that is like such a delicious challenge because it liberates you. It emancipates you from ever being like, no, I cannot really tell you what it was like to take ayahuasca. No, I cannot tell you what it was like to stand on that beach at sunset. But oh my God, my language is so eager to try to brush up against the splendor of that existence. And so as much of that as possible, I feel like I'm a little dog with my words, chasing the glory that is this fleeting and fragile life. I would say success also looks like I've been gifted the most incredible love. My puppy dog, my fiance. And when I say puppy dog, I mean human puppy dog. I wish I had a dog, but no, I have a glorious little alien poet who is my love, and success would look like being as happy now as I am with him in perpetuity. I want to be old people together. And then I think it's also just learning as much as possible about life, about myself, about the human condition, opening up higher registers of gentleness and kindness in myself, inviting other people to do the same. I would feel like I had succeeded. Yeah. And composting and being kind to the trees and all the plants. If I get more people to love plants, I will definitely feel like I've succeeded.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for your thoughtful questions.